He didn't look like a man defeated. He looked like a hero of our time. Last night, fans gathered round Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of yesterday's mutiny in Rostov-on-Don, as he set off, supposedly for a comfortable retirement in sunny Belarus. Now he's been pardoned by President Putin. It's peace and love. Everything forgiven and forgotten, as you were. Or is it? It was President Lukashenko of Belarus, seen here in happier times, who supposedly did his old friend Vladimir Vladimirovich a favour by persuading Prigozhin to turn back his mutinous convoy and opt for exile, not overthrow. The Wagner fighters, who had taken control of the town, assembled to return to their camps, now under Ministry of Defence control. People cheered, took photos and chanted as the police looked on. If anyone dares to show President Putin these images, which reveal the popularity of the force that wanted to overthrow him, he's unlikely to be pleased. At Lipetsk, halfway to Moscow, they were filling in the trench dug yesterday to stop Wagner's fighters from passing. But you know, you'll be able to see where the road has been patched. The surface won't be smooth like before, as if nothing has happened. A group from Storm Z, a new unit formed to push back against the Ukrainian counter-offensive, said they had backed the mutiny and were angry it was over.
Так вообще не делается, когда люди друг с другом двигаются, они двигаются ровничком, а ты, получается, нелюдь.
By contrast, a Chechen brigade of ardent Putin supporters made a music video showing their soldiers who had charged up the road ready to take on the mutineers, wandering around, all tooled up and nowhere to go.
С обращением к россиянам выступил Владимир Путин, и эта речь возымела действие.
State TV said the Russian people were grateful for President Putin's strong leadership, which had resolved the problem, and aired a clip of him talking about the special operation in Ukraine, recorded before yesterday's mutiny.
Конечно, первостепенное внимание уделяем.
But some commentators who usually praise the Russian president are now questioning his authority.
This is a serious blow to the authority of the country and to the authority of the president, because it also revealed the power structure. The whole world is watching. In general, there was a feeling that everything here is unshakable, but it turned out, in fact, everything is not that unshakable.
According to Russian telegram channels, Wagner fighters shot down 6 attack helicopters and 1 fixed-wing aircraft, killing more than a dozen airmen. They inflicted more damage on the Russian Air Force than Ukrainian forces have ever managed in a single day. As they pursue their counter-offensive, the Ukrainians are now fighting what they hope will be an increasingly demotivated enemy. During Prigozhin's ill-fated march for justice, they managed to clear trenches west of the Seversky Donets River. And they'll push on, knowing that after 24 hours of upheaval, the Russian military leadership is in total disarray. And disarray is the word, because the morning after the night before, all the main characters in this drama were missing in action. President Putin, as you saw, just on pre-record. What about Prigozhin? Where is he? Has he got to Belarus? Well, through his press office, he put out a message which said, "Hi to everyone. I'll be back in touch when I've got better cell phone coverage." And then what about Shoigu and Gerasimov? That's the defense minister and the chief of staff of the Russian army. They haven't been seen for days, and there are rumors rife in Russia that they are going to lose their jobs, because everything that Prigozhin said before this mutiny was true. He said that this was an unnecessary war and that it had been mismanaged and that it was the fault of the army military top brass. And so that is very worrying for President Putin, and he's going to have to manage it somehow. And he's also going to have to manage the fact that, as you saw in that report, this mutiny, at least in Rostov-on-Don, appears to have been rather popular.
So we spent a lot of time in the last 24 hours with our head spinning, Lindsey, talking about the geopolitics of this and, of course, events in Moscow. What about on the front line here in Ukraine? Has anything changed at all there, as far as you know?
Well, my Ukrainian colleague here has been talking to contacts there on the front line, and the soldiers are saying to him that they see this as a gift for the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which has so far been rather slow, because they think that the Russians are going to have to withdraw some of their forces to go back to Russia, essentially to keep order and to try and stop some of the disillusioned Wagnerites from maybe doing the same again or taking part in sabotage acts, because there are sabotage groups in Russia already. They think that the military top brass will become very distracted because they're fighting for their own jobs, so that may take their eye off what's actually happening on the battlefield. It may be rather demoralizing for the mid-level officers. And also, the Wagner Group was in many ways the most effective military force on the battlefield. And of course, that's now gone away. They're going to have to become part of the regular forces, which they may not like. So the Ukrainians certainly think that this is to their advantage. And you think, Matt, all of this happened because President Putin decided to launch this unnecessary, ill-advised invasion of Ukraine. Cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. Well, the biggest and baddest of those dogs came back to bite him.
You do like your poetry. Lindsey Hilsum, thank you very much indeed. Well, we can see the cracks emerging. That is a quote, and that is the verdict of the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, speaking about events in Russia on US television this morning. Listen.
I don't want to speculate on it, but I don't think we've seen the final act. This has been a devastating strategic failure for Putin across virtually every front, economic, military, geopolitical standing.
Well, joining me now is Kurt Volker, a diplomat who served as the US Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations from 2017 to 2019. Welcome back on the program, Kurt Volker. Were you one of those people yesterday in the kind of, heady excitement of what was going on, who was predicting the downfall of Vladimir Putin? And were you wrong?
Well, it's too early to say. We, as your correspondent noted, we haven't seen any of the lead actors yet. I can't believe that Putin would allow Prigozhin just to go free after attacking the state the way he did. So I think there are more shoes to drop still. And as I think everyone is concluding, it shows the cracks in the regime now. Putin is no longer seen as an invincible leader, but really showing a great deal of weakness.
And the fact that he allowed Prigozhin to live, not to go on trial, allowed his militia to carry on existing, is that a sign of weakness, or is that a sign of cunning, Putin diplomacy and negotiations?
Yeah, I think these are wheels within wheels. I think that Prigozhin did not want to continue to take the fight to Moscow because he wants to be seen as a Russian hero. He wants to be seen as someone who is defending the state. And instead, by attacking, he would be seen as a mutineer. So he wanted to stop. And I think he fully anticipates that Putin will go after him again in order to prove that he is in a strong position. And that will provide a justification for Prigozhin to try again. For Putin, I don't think he really was confident that he could really pull this off. If you look at the reaction of the public, the reaction of the military in places like Rostov and Voronezh, I don't think he was confident where it was going to go. So it was in his interest, too, to actually put this to one side for now and see if he can take out Prigozhin later.
But however long this takes, do you still think that this is the beginning of the end for the era of Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think it's the beginning of the end of Russia's war in Ukraine. because no matter how this resolves internally in Russia, it has exposed the lie that this is a special military operation, the lie that few people have been killed on the Russian side, that it's all going very well, the lie that Russia is not committing war crimes, that they're denazifying Ukraine. All of that is now exposed because Prigozhin himself exposed it. And I think if you're a soldier on the front lines now in Ukraine, you have to be wondering, do you really want to be the last person to die in a failing operation?
Finally and briefly, how dangerous was this moment yesterday, not just for Russia and Ukraine, but also for the rest of Europe, perhaps even the world, a potential civil war inside a nuclear power?
Yeah, I think that we always have to be concerned about who's in control of nuclear weapons and making sure that they're as secure as possible to the extent we have anything to do with it. But I don't think either side here had a motivation to use nuclear weapons. And I think we have to compare the dangers of fighting inside Russia with the dangers of an aggressive authoritarian Russia attacking others in Europe. Neither one is good, and I think some kind of change in Russia is now almost inevitable.
Kurt Volker, thank you very much indeed. Well, Ukraine is not the only theatre in which Russian jets have been in action today. Flying at high altitude in the skies over Syria, Russian warplanes bombing villages and towns near the northwestern city of Idlib, hitting a vegetable market crowded with shoppers ahead of the Eid festival. The attack left at least 9 dead and 30 injured, according to the White Helmet's emergency response group. Russia has been supporting the Syrian regime in an offensive against the main opposition groups in the region for a decade. But here in Ukraine, the question is, will history repeat itself? The last attempted coup in Russia was in 1991. It was squashed, but the Soviet leader then, Mikhail Gorbachev, was gone just a few months later. So, is Putin now a president without a prayer? Vladimir Putin lighting a candle just a few days ago. No, not for himself, but for Moscow's sacrifice in the Great Patriotic War. The conflict against Nazi Germany, with its hard-fought victory, is the comfort blanket of Russian politics, the one that every leader, including Putin, snuggles back into when they feel insecure and threatened. But the world war that was more relevant for yesterday's dramatic upheaval was, of course, World War I and the year 1917. In his television address, an ashen-faced Vladimir Putin even referred to the date. Perhaps he could see the ghost of his predecessor, Tsar Nicholas II, who was toppled in that year and later executed by the Bolsheviks. His demise was triggered by returning troops from the trenches of the First World War who believed that the aloof and isolated Tsar had abandoned them. A bit like the mutinous mercenaries of the Wagner group, who feel that the Kremlin had left them under-resourced and underappreciated in the muddy trenches of this war in Ukraine. Putin had famously embraced isolation like the ill-fated Tsar. There were the ridiculously elongated tables that turned COVID social distancing into statecraft. There are the church services where Putin, the born-again believer, likes to have a private audience with his maker. How different is this political hermit clad in paranoia compared to the emerging strongman of a more optimistic era who relished baring his chest in public? How ironic that this image of muscular virility has now been turned into the obvious meme of an emperor with no clothes. Here was Putin, once the master of his message and the master of his servant, waited on by the Kremlin caterer turned Wagner warlord turned rival. Yevgeny Prigozhin, who exchanged his concierge's suit for a combat uniform and a criminal record, also has his predecessors in Russian history. Rasputin, the monk turned healer turned spiritual leader who became too powerful at the Tsar's court and was murdered by jealous courtiers. Before that, Potemkin, the intellectual reformer who helped modernize Russia but became too powerful at court. Prigozhin is no intellectual, but he was allowed to become too powerful and build a parallel army. His challenge to the Kremlin has shattered Putin's aura of authority like nothing so far. Again, history gives a helping hand. In 1991, the then Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev survived a short-lived coup against him, but wounded beyond repair, power seeped away from him, and a few months later, he was gone. Replaced by the man who had famously challenged him, Russian leader Boris Yeltsin, who climbed on a tank to claim the reins of power and become the president who ultimately succumbed to the tyranny of vodka, before handing those reins to the man who now needs much more than a stiff drink.